Good. Well, thank you, Jim, for the introduction and for putting us in the spot that's keeping everyone from their cocktails. I'll do my best to keep us on
Let's make
time.
sure everyone can get everyone here.
Great. We have three members of our panel here, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But first, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself and to tell you a little bit about the new publication from Neurotech Reports, which is called BioElectRx Business Report. The new publication, which will be launching this month and was just announced today, will be focusing exclusively on bioelectronic medicines, which we're defining as modulating the peripheral nervous system to affect an end organ that's not part of the CNS. So it's a pretty broad net, and we're taking the perspective that this is an area that should be ripe for collaboration with biopharmaceutical companies. And the aim of this publication is to provide a bridge between the bioelectronic medicine sector and the pharma sector, so that each knows what's happening in the other's space, and so that they can have the opportunity to learn about the activity that the others are doing. We'd like the pharma companies to be more aware of exciting developments, startups, emerging science happening in bioelectronic medicine, and bioelectronic medicine companies and investors to be more aware of what pharmas are getting involved, how they're approaching it, what their strategies are, what kinds of deals are getting done. I'm coming to this from a background in the pharmaceutical industry as the former editor of BioCentury, which is a biopharmaceutical publication where I spent 15 years in total and 6 as the editor. So the space that you all work in is new to me, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it. But I find it a very exciting way of developing potentially disease-modifying and curative therapies, which is also very strongly the direction that the biopharmaceutical industry has been moving toward, particularly for the last decade. So that's enough about me and about the publication. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Sitting at the table with me, you all know Crames, directly to my left, of Crames Medical Consulting and the former president of the INS. To his left is Eric Grigsby, who is founder and CEO of Neurovations. And joining us via Zoom is Lisa Schaeffer, who is CSO of Cerebral Therapeutics and previously was the Senior Director of New Device and Bioelectronic Technologies at Teva Pharmaceuticals. So Lisa has worn both hats in bioelectronic medicine and in pharmaceuticals. I'm going to start by inviting each of our panelists to deliver some introductory remarks. And then we'll launch into our discussion. And I'll ask Elliot to begin.
Okay, thank you. So when I was asked by Jim and Susan to be on this panel, I'm retired. It's been 7 years now retired, so I sort of had to think this issue of how pharmaceutical companies and neuromodulation companies could work together or collaborate or in some way get together. And I thought that the issue is synergies of purpose. And in my consulting, I've done some consulting with pharmaceutical companies because of my neuromodulation work. So to me, the issue is bioelectronic medicine. The body is electric, and utilizing the body electric, we can actually change it electrically. So what is bioelectronic medicine? For those of you who don't know, all body functions are electrochemical. Body function is electrochemical. Theorists of bioelectronic medicine believe that the normal body function has an electric footprint for normal. Abnormal body function disease also has an electronic footprint for abnormal. Therefore, the bioelectronic theorists say treatment of disease should be electric, that is neuromodulation, and moving the abnormal to normal. GSK, a pharmaceutical company, the third largest pharmaceutical company in the world, has invested billions of dollars into the idea, which they call electroceuticals. So thinking of how the neuromodulation community might interact with pharmaceutical community, because the bodily function is both electric and chemical, the two communities have synergies of purpose. That is management of abnormal body function and disease. Bioelectronic management will be through electronics, pharmaceutical companies through the chemical manipulation. And it's really not a difference because the electric manipulation is really a chemical manipulation. That is a molecular manipulation. So neuromodulation industry is fast growing. Since it's fast growing, it makes lots of money, and money attracts other industries to it. So that is another purpose or synergy of purpose. Only neuromodulation, not pharma, can manage some diseases and disorders of the nervous system, like restoration of neurologic function after injury. A pill doesn't do it. A chemical doesn't do it, but electricity can do it. There is the ability to sense neural signals and stimulate for modulation of those signals for restoration. So big pharma might interact with our community in the following ways. And I've been involved with consultation, as Eric has been involved with consultation, investment, licensing agreements, mergers and acquisitions, and I'm sure you can think of other ways. But to me, the bottom line is there's a synergies of purpose, and because there's a synergies of purpose, pharmaceutical companies, neuromodulation companies will find a way to do it.
Thank you. I'd like to move next to Lisa, if you are ready. And Lisa, I believe that you have the ability to share your own slides.
Okay.
Okay, Elliot, are you going to be doing slides later, or
No.
You're done?
I'm done.
Okay, so Lisa, go ahead.
Oh, wait, I have one more slide. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Very important.
Yeah, let me pop that up because I
Yeah.
figured you wanted to.
Yeah.
I figured you wanted to
forgotten.
present that.
So Eric and I are co-founders and co-directors of a meeting that happens every year. It hasn't happened in 2 years because of COVID. But we are directors of a meeting called Neuromodulation Science. So I'm asking folks to save the date. It will be in Kauai, Hawaii, February 28, 2022 to March 2nd, 2022. And you can, if you go on ntsconference.com, you can see the agenda. This is the only invasive and non-invasive neuromodulation meeting that's solely dedicated to preclinical neuromodulation and bioengineering towards the understanding of mechanisms of action of neuromodulation therapies. Again, it's preclinical. We don't talk about clinical outcomes of neuromodulation therapies. This meeting was created for neuroscientists, bioengineers, postdoc students, clinicians, and members of industry. And there will be an opportunity for networking, relaxation, and fun, asking scientific questions to true experts in their respective fields, presenting your science as abstracts, sponsorship, and exhibiting your products. And I do want to say, I've done this meeting now for 7 years. This scientific agenda that we have this year in Erica is just an outstanding group of scientists, experts in the field from all over the world. So please think about coming to it.
Okay, thank you.
It's a tough sell to get people to go to Kauai in February. Lisa, please.
Sure, coming on. Nice to be with you all. Sorry I couldn't join you there in San Francisco. Can you guys see my screen? It says my path. Okay, great. Nice to be on a panel with Elliot and Eric, who I know from many years of their mentorship in the field of neuromodulation. And what I would say is I've been sort of tucked away in neuropharma modulation. It's nice to be back to this Neurotech Forum. So just was asked to give a few words on my background and why it might be relevant, despite being tucked away in pharma for the last about 5 years. Really started my career in drug delivery at 3M and knew I wanted to be a industry scientist, and then actually got wind of or read an article on the first Minnesotans to be implanted with the DBS for Parkinson's. And it was at that point in, I think it was 1995, I knew I wanted to work for Medtronic, and I knew I wanted to study neuroscience. Ended up in neuroimmunology, which is still the field I love and am passionate about every day. Got to go to work for Medtronic for about, I was there for 14 years, started in actually trying to help the engineers as the first scientist in the neuromodulation group understand the emerging science out of Kevin Tracy's lab, which you're all very familiar with, I'm sure, now as SetPoint Medical and others working on vagus nerve stim. Medtronic didn't bite at that for a variety of business reasons, not science. But I ended up focusing much of my time in neuromod on the leveraging of a wonderful piece of, a wonderful technology and implantable programmable pump. And by the time I left, I was leading global research for both targeted drug delivery as well as neuromodulation, having a lot of fun. But it was really this promise of taking device and solving pharma in neuro, solving pharma's problems with respect to treating CNS diseases. So it's been my core belief, at least for the last decade or more, that it's not that pharma lacks good drugs to treat diseases of the central nervous system, it's that they lack good ways to get them there. And so now I'm Chief Scientific Officer of Cerebral Therapeutics, which is, I joined as employee number 3 2 years ago. And we are in the process of submitting our IND and have clinical trials going on in other geographies, but very focused on intracerebroventricular delivery. So again, focusing on neuropharma modulation. A few words about Cerebral Therapeutics, clinical stage biopharmaceutical company, and leveraging the fully implantable pump to bring drug directly to the brain instead of intrathecal, which many of you may be aware of from Medtronic and others, bringing it to the lateral ventricles of the brain, much like you would place a shunt. And just real quickly, a few words on our lead program is taking a well-known drug and to treat refractory epilepsy. So there's about a third of patients or people with seizure disorders that are refractory to anti-epileptic drugs, and oral or systemic treated. And so what we've done is basically teaching an old drug new tricks, so Depakote or Depakine delivered directly to the ventricles. And so that's the pharmaceutical side of us. But importantly, we've also developed the device to do that. So we leverage commercially available pumps connected to pump catheter. And it's this portion called the ICVRX. It's a cranial port and dual lumen catheter. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, because it's been really fascinating to listen to all of the, really all of the progress in what the neuromodulation, the electrical neuromodulation side calls biomarkers. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we think about that on the pharma side of things. But in short, we're a company that focuses on severe unmet needs. So we're not treating, easy to reach CNS diseases, although I can't even name one of those because they're all pretty challenging. with injectable formulations, so modifying the formulation to be safe for CNS or direct to CNS administration, solely focused on the lateral ventricles at this time. We're not doing intrathecal. We think that the way to reach the higher brain centers in meaningful amounts is meaningful concentrations is through the ventricles. And that's really taking some lessons learned from many years at Medtronic, doing pharma collaborations where we looked at intrathecal and intracerebroventricular as well as intraparenchymal. Intraparenchymal is very challenging, but really a great foundation from all of you who have focused careers in therapy development on placing leads. We take a lot of the same neurosurgical technology and techniques and just apply that to delivering a catheter to the ventricle in order to deliver drugs. And in that, those lessons learned from both big pharma, being on the big pharma side of things, my past at Teva, mid-sized pharma, Upshur Smith, and then previously Medtronic, learning that it is really hard to converge these two industries in big companies. But in a small company and in a startup, we have hired pretty much one for one. When we hire a pharma talent, hire a device talent, pharma talent, device talent, and growing with that particular structure in mind to be integrated pharma and device in one house. But I thought this slide was relevant to include in that whenever we talk to pharma, because we're not a discovery pharma group, we're leveraging either failed drugs, failed because they have failed for toxicity reasons when administered orally, they don't get to the blood-brain, get across the blood-brain barrier in any meaningful concentrations, or you have to treat with so much drug concentration that you have systemic side effects. So we're often talking to pharma to find licensing deals. And I used this also when I was in pharma, trying to teach the opportunity with bioelectronic medicine to say, look, pharma device is not new. Implantable devices are not new. You wouldn't think of depriving someone of a pacemaker. There's been many years of FDA approved implantable programmable drug delivery, many years of brain stim with DBS and now peripheral nerve stim. And as far as it goes for the ventricular space, many, many years of shunts being placed to drain the CSF in the lateral ventricles, but really no optimization in brain drug delivery. And I think that's just because it's so challenging to converge these fields, as I know Elliot and Eric have lived through that for many years as well in intrathecal space. But this is our solution to taking device within pharma and pharma into device. It's this dual lumen cranial port. And the dual lumen is really important in that one side delivers drugs, whether it's from a port in this picture or from an implantable pump. The other side aspirates for CSF biomarkers. And so while I sort of grew up in the neuromodulation and thinking very frequently about biomarkers in terms of electrical signals, beta waves, was always a close colleague of Tim Dennison, who I know many of you know, and his early days of, he basically argued for budgets around his brain radio and one of my drug delivery programs that we were both championing at the same time. At the end of the day, like really what would have been awesome is if we could put those budgets together and really looked at drug delivery and electrical modulation in one unit. Well, I think that's on the horizon right now. We're have a system to sample for CSF biomarkers to really enable therapy development, understanding of what is going on in the brain, in the ventricles, when you deliver a particular drug therapy. And to summarize, so when I think back on the invitation to sit on this panel, or when I've been thinking about that over the weekend and thinking about how my perspective has really been shaped by being on both the big device company side, the big pharma side, and really what has limited both groups in truly successfully treating CNS diseases is all the patient heterogeneity and the biological complexity of CNS diseases. And I think so much of the work that all of you are doing on the sort of on the biomarker side, on the sensing, on the AI is really what's needed to get these gears moving. And I think very frequently about the convergence and the partnership that's required in the CNS space in particular to really make better therapies, make any therapies in some of these diseases. So that is a bit of background on myself, and look forward to the panel's discussion topics.
Thank you. Eric, introductory remarks on engaging pharma.
Sure, thanks. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a practicing clinician for a bunch of years and trained in surgery and anesthesiology and pain. And I've been in Napa after a little academic career for about 5 years. I practiced in Napa, which is an unlikely place for a biotech-related company to develop. But in the middle of my career, I was one of the busiest implanters in the country in both pump interspinal infusion at that time and also neurostimulation. And implanted several thousand guys. And during the period of time when I was a busy clinician, of course, I was recruited to be a PI on a large number of studies, both pharma, medical device, and then recently in biologics and related things, molecular biology pieces. So over the years, also trained in business and have had an interest in business and scaling a little something from Napa, which is again no easy task. But now our company is called Neurovations, and during my clinical career, I had a clinic and a surgery center, and that was the primary business. And now over time, the clinical research business clinical data development has become primary. And we found that it's interesting to have a clinical data development business that has a clinic in which we can do feasibility studies and a surgery center in which we can do the implanted pieces and the interventional pieces without a lot of headache and hassle. We have a clinical laboratory that's very strong in molecular diagnostics and analysis, and that got diverted this last year and a half or so. We've done almost all of the COVID testing for Napa County, but we're back on track really to use our lab to support our clinical investigations for simple things like cytokine analysis from various body fluids, and of course we have strong molecular capabilities also. And so we have this education component where Ellie and I have partnered for a number of years. We have a Napa Pain meeting and other things, all of which kind of serve to build a community of people around our innovation business and clinical data development. And we found a lot of traction with smaller companies that don't have a well-developed clinical affairs department, who need to put together a study and have a site to do it that's dependable, particularly interventional things that require surgery center and doing that clinic. So feasibility studies are simple. Anyway, so that's the business. I also have worked in medical device development. I still serve as Chief Medical Officer for the Alfred Mann Foundation, which is a nonprofit R&D shop, essentially now kind of rebranding itself as an incubator innovation center down in Los Angeles area. So I see a boatload of projects come through, looking for partnerships and co-development opportunities. The foundation, just to be clear, doesn't actually fund projects, but we provide incubation, R&D support. We have 70 employees, 40 of which are engineers, so we have pretty high capabilities. And you may understand that the foundation developed the cochlear implant, the mini-med infusion pump, advanced bionics, which became Boston Scientific's neuromodulation division. So see a lot of projects, and over the years had a few good ideas that turned into patentable ideas. So I understand a little bit about the development process too. So I spent a lot of time in translation of clinical research and business realities. So that's my background. I worked a lot with pharma and biologics and medical device companies and various roles. So I understand their needs kind of at line level, and I'll agree with Elliot that we just to get the discussion going. I'll agree that we have a common purpose. There's some quibbles on that, but we certainly have different cultures. We certainly don't have the same culture. And so that's sort of one point to explore. And so if we get together in any kind of a meaningful collaboration, we have to come to an understanding on the how-to piece. And then to some degree, I think our pharma colleagues don't necessarily agree that they don't do neuromodulation. I think that they fundamentally believe they're neuromodulating just through a different mechanism. In fact, maybe they're doing it more directly. For example, Medtronic's new DTM strategy, glial cell activation, great. Maybe reduction in pro-inflammatory cytokines in the immediate area, great. Well, there are some people that think that just applying, let's say, a DNA strategy or other ways to biochemically or from a molecular biology perspective, just directly reducing the neuroinflammatory response to chronic pain at the level of the spinal cord might not need neurotechnology. So we have a little education to do on both sides and a little bit of a different culture. And I know Lisa has, straddled that fence, had a foot in both camps much of her career. So I'm interested in what you think about that cultural piece, Lisa, and how we can do better on that. That's a look of.
You're looking at me.
That was the look of someone trying to find the right button on the Zoom.
That's hard to find when you guys, yeah, anyway, couldn't see where you're looking. Yes, so yeah, I agree with you, totally different cultures. And I think Susan was gonna ask at some point for me to comment on how that went down at Teva. You might, if you looked at my LinkedIn, you'd see I was only there for 2 years. So that might tell you how that went. But I could say more in a moment if you'd like.
Well, let me ask a question about that. So we've talked about at least 2 different business cases that make a great deal of sense for collaboration between neurotech companies and pharma companies. And one of them is something like Inscopix, where there's a technology that can provide information that can help pharmas do a better job of developing drugs that actually work for more patients, because the information and data quality from the preclinical models is actually predictive. And another is the example that Lisa has described, wherein there's a drug delivery connection. And both of those types of cases are applying a medical device technology to further the delivery or development of drug products. But what's the case for big pharma interest in a therapeutic neurotechnology device? What is it that, and I want to ask that from both sides. What is it, apart from funding, that a neurotech company might seek from a pharma partner? We'll take the funding as a given. And what might a pharma company expect to gain from a partnership or an acquisition of those types of products? Is there a way that they fit together in a business sense?
I can just welcome. First of all, as Eric says, with neuromodulation, we directly stimulate neurotransmitters chemicals. And farmers, they give chemicals that have the same effect that it has on the body. It's not a direct. So when you give a pharmaceutical agent, it has direct effect and it has side effect. It has side effect on many different levels. So obviously, for me, and I think pharmacy said as well, GSK being an example, if you can stimulate locally and release chemical locally to have the desired effect without side effect, that is a big plus. So there's a lot of money being spent on research. I have had the good fortune of consulting with pharmaceutical companies on the basis that neuromodulation was interesting therapeutics and money making. And the pharmaceutical company needs to invest money, and they saw ways to invest in neuromodulation therapies. They do. Now, some companies like J&J, investing through Codman and J&J in neuromodulation therapies, realized that they should stick to the knitting and not invest outside of pharmaceutical companies, where other companies might see a synergy of purpose.
Well, for J&J is a unique case because they have three distinct units, pharmaceuticals, consumer, and medical devices. And so I might argue that they have a more natural platform for that kind of collaboration with neurotech companies than a pure play pharmaceutical company. And we are seeing J&J Development Corp making some investments in bioelectronic medicine. And we have seen GlaxoSmithKline put a lot of money into research in neurotechnology and into the Galvani joint venture with Verily. And we've seen Merck Kaga make a recent investment in a couple of deals, and we've seen Astellas make an acquisition. But there are dozens of other pharmaceutical companies out there that aren't biting. And I think, Lisa, Teva is an interesting case because it was predominantly, but not exclusively, a pharmaceutical company. And maybe the model for Teva was a little different because a large share of the business was in generics, and really just one giant branded, patented drug. So is there something about the economics of that business where medical devices fit in better?
Yeah, so I'll give two examples of different theses from the pharma side that were, my own actual, like career experiences, which was, the only reason I left Medtronic is because I loved the idea of brain targeted drug delivery. And we were challenged with new leadership at Medtronic to realize that dream. It just, ventures wasn't going to work, and these things were in ventures because they were the long haul. So right there, device companies don't have as long as pharma investment horizon perspectives. So that's a difference. And lo and behold, there was this mid-sized pharma basically down the highway from Medtronic that was interested in innovating beyond its generics portfolio. They had made some investments in neuro, but they were pretty far out. And they knew, like every pharma company does, that's going to go into neuro, that your number one challenge is getting the drug there, getting the drug beyond blood-brain barrier. So they were really pleased. We've just pitched to them on a whim and thought, this isn't going to go anywhere. And they wanted to take what we had was a Huntington program to treat Huntington with a gene therapy, now called the gene therapy siRNA or gene silencing technique, and deliver it intraparenchymally with the Medtronic implantable infusion system. So I got recruited for that purpose, and we were going to contract back all the neuro R&D team that Elliot and Eric worked with also at the time. They were consultants for us and great steerers of that vision. And the deal fell through for a variety of business reasons, nothing science. But I will say the science decision makers in a pharma company really have a hard time, at least where I've been, really swallowing this new technology. They would rather spend years trying to modify their chemistry to evade the blood-brain barrier than put it in some hardware. So that's one thing. And then Teva thesis was a little different. It was also generics, but as you said, with a great branded neuro drug for MS, Copaxone. And as the generics market changed radically in the 2014 to 2016 time, they were looking for new sources of innovation, new sources of revenue. And so I was recruited there to say, what if we didn't sell drug? What if we sold packages of electrons? bioelectronic. But there again, the challenge was getting the pharma heads, which decision makers are often scientists, life scientists. They couldn't get their heads around something so radically different. So I made PowerPoints for 2 years, and and then things radically changed for Teva anyway, and yeah, everything, kind of the bottom dropped out of Teva. Yeah, and you can look at their stock.
Yeah, please, Eric.
Yeah, if I could pitch in a little bit historically. So just because J&J has a medical device and a pharma division doesn't mean they like each other or talk to each other.
Oh, of course not.
And so the pharma division would see spinal cord stimulation that reduces neuroinflammation as competition, not as a friend. And so just cut into the market share of the pharma side, right? So, and historically we've positioned neurostimulation sort of out of necessity, and I think it goes back to the origin of the pain practice of the field of pain management over the years, which was basically taking everybody else's unsolvable problems, right? So the use case for us was always, we put a stimulator in them if the drugs don't work, if they fail conservative therapy. And the pharmaceutical companies have done a great job of getting pretty powerful drugs with an iffy safety efficacy profile as conservative therapy. But nevertheless, we've positioned ourselves as taking care of the edge cases, the difficult ones. And so when you make a pitch to pharma and you say, well, there are 7,000 pain doctors in the country, and we think there might be 5,000 of these devices put in the next year, they're like, oh, sort of a rounding error on their San Francisco Bay Area sales of XYZ drug, right? So it's the cultural piece that's a miss, and the scale of medical device is just so unfamiliar, to the drive and the necessity of the revenue stream that's required, in big pharma particularly, which is why I agree with Lisa that there are opportunities in smaller collaborations and companies where you don't have this kind of this silo, so to speak. But the nature of our field has always been sort of marginal use case when drugs fail. And pharma is quite convinced that that's the real use for these devices up until now, because we haven't had a single one that has become primary therapy for any particular disease state.
Right.
I just like to say, I think Eric, that the cultures are changing with the advent of bioelectronic medicine, electrical stimulants, the biggest nerve for disease management, inflammation, communicable arthritis, Crohn's disease. I think there's been an awakening process, where biologics have failed in arthritis, secondary salvage with vagal nerve stimulation is the case. And so I think pharmaceutical companies are seeing the benefit of disease management with electricity. In the past, I used to think it was voodoo. I'm serious. I sat in a room like this with 100 pharmaceutical scientists, and I was asked to give a talk on neuromodulation. And afterwards, they said, "Bah humbug." Most of them just said, "Bah humbug, this is just not science." And in fact, it wasn't science. We had therapy, we had a device that we used and didn't know.
That's a rather inelegant way to say you're trying to take some of my market share.
Well, no, I think these are scientists. These are not business people. And they say, well, what's the mechanism? I couldn't then explain the mechanism. Today, when we stimulate the vagus nerve, we can talk about mechanisms. Our meeting, Eric, is about mechanisms.
Oh yeah, I don't mean to undermine the enthusiasm for our meeting. That's in Kauai at the early part of March, in case you're wondering.
So I think that could lead us into another track of conversation, but I do want to see if there are any questions from the audience or from Zoom. Jojo?
There's a lot of tension or a lot of apprehension about bigger companies absorbing smaller startups in the neurotech field and shelving technologies out of fear of competition. Is that risk actually increased when we get pharma involved and when they don't understand what we're doing and they're afraid of it?
Well, I didn't finish the direction I was going.
Oh, sorry.
When I was saying that in the past, we didn't know about mechanism. But today we're learning about mechanism. We have scientific basis. Thanks to people like Chris Zura and others, we know about the mechanism of electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve and how it affects this pain and what those pathways. And so when scientists look at that data, they can't shelve it because it's powerful then. So it's powerful, they can shelve it if they want to. But I don't think that that's where pharma is going to go. If they're going to invest, I think they're going to invest in the future. And, you know, optogenetics is another field of neuromodulation that is very powerful. And people see that. So the tools of neuromodulation is powerful. It no longer is the science of disease management. We're looking for a long, long future.
Good question to do. Lisa, I wonder if you, are you considered a combination product? If so, maybe you or the other panelists would like to talk a little about the joys of dealing with the FDA office of combination products.
I couldn't hear the question. Can
Oh, I'm
Susan,
sorry, I already did.
panelists
Are
rephrase?
you considered a combination product?
Yes, we're,
Yeah, talk a little bit about the process of getting FDA approval for a combination product and how it might be different either from, you know, PMA or NDA.
well, thanks to Medtronic and Fluonics, there are pumps on them, you know, that are commercially available that then you can, in a collaboration with them, you could just file your IND and, you know, for the drug side and say in a sort of container closure, if you will. It's more complicated than that. It's not just a vial, right? It's a mechanical device, but essentially do drug device compatibility stability. And that part does go to CDRH for review, but in the Office of Combination Product manages that. But we submit an IND and put the device stuff in there. And that's partly because our device, our ICVRX part is novel, but we'll use it as, we're basically asking them to approve the drug and anything that comes out of the whole path as all part of the drug. So extractables, leachables, all run into the drug path, and you do all that testing together and you put that into your IND. But it's complicated, but it's certainly not, I should say it's complex, but it's not impossible.
If I could pitch in there, thanks Lisa for that real life experience, but the pumps are FDA approved based on accuracy, right? And compatibility of the materials and not exploding inside the abdomen and where you put them and things like that. So they're not approved specifically with another drug, and that's later to be demonstrated with the biocompatibility and the compatibility with the device and stability over time at body temperature and all that. But the devices themselves are approved based on materials compatibility essentially and accuracy of delivery. So with a little bit of work, you know, you could theoretically put anything in there, prove the safety of the drug and efficacy of the drug and the location you're putting it in, and be okay with pump. There's a little bit of friction there for sure, but they're familiar with it enough now. There've been a few projects in front of CDRH that have to do with other drugs that they understand it now.
And remember Medtronic, they had approval for the pump, as Eric said. They had a drug that they could deliver a vacuum pump with spasticity. No pharmaceutical company wanted to produce it, so they did. And they became a drug company until they can get rid of it. And they did.
Okay, yeah, do we have another question from the audience? Not. then I will ask each of our panelists to answer one last question in brief. And that is this. One of the things, and Eric, you alluded to this, you talked about the size of the revenue streams that are necessary for products within pharmaceutical companies. And it's certainly the case that we continue to see multi-billion-dollar single drug products. And that's not something that we see as often in the medical device field. However, we're seeing fewer and fewer blockbuster drugs. We're seeing it's costing more and more to get a drug developed. And there is already pricing pressure on pharmaceuticals, and there's surely to be much more, probably in the relatively near term, which is causing a lot of pharmaceutical companies to look at different pricing models that are focused on outcomes. Are trends like that likelier? Do they help deal with the issue of this sort of incompatibility of business model in pharma and medical devices? Or are there other catalysts that you can think of that would spur more collaboration that you see coming down the pike?
Well, I'll briefly take that, and I'll get out of the way for these other two guys and girls. I've never worked in big pharma, which is a blessing. I don't view it as a lost career opportunity, I'll be honest with you. But I think that there are pressures on, all that you say I know is right from what I read. But I'll be honest, I don't think they look to neuromodulation for that solution. You know, I don't think we're there yet. I think we just have an awful lot of work. And I think what it's going to take is a neuromodulation strategy to be primary therapy for a previously unsolvable therapy by typical pharmacology or biologics. And when we get that, they'll be most interested, right? But Elliot just made the case for me on the business with rheumatoid arthritis. Said, well, when medicines fail, then vagal nerve stimulation can be helpful, and that's exactly the way pharma views it. And to be fair, pharma has made tremendous headway in treating RA. You no longer see patients coming in the office with just miserable, untreated total body inflammation anymore. So yes, all of that's right. There are a lot of pressures on their model, like there are on every model. I don't think they're looking to us yet, and I'm one of us, by the way, just FYI. I mean, I'm on team neuromodulation, but it's important to not, what they say, read your own tea leaves, or however you want to say it. But I think they're looking elsewhere. But the minute we have a strategy that becomes primary therapy for a previously unsolvable problem, pharma will be absolutely glad to jump on the neuromodulation bandwagon. And that's going to happen.
Lisa, what do you think?
I totally agree with Eric. Pharma's not looking to neuromodulation to solve. I learned that the hard way. I went to pharma and was trying to push it towards neuromodulation, big pharma that is. But where I'm super hopeful that will make a big difference for patients and for pharma and med tech is the area of sensing. I mean, if there's one thing that scares, as I understand it, investors the most in CNS is that it's so difficult because of the patient heterogeneity, the biologic complexity, the reliance on subjective endpoints. And so the opportunity to solve that or at least lend help to understanding the disease and or the value of the therapy that you're applying through sensing, to me is really where it's at, and where pharma is and should increasingly be looking to neuromodulation for.
Thank you. Elliot, what could be the last word on the subject?
I'm a team
You're the captain of the team. Come on.
I'm a retired pain doc, so I really don't have much erudition here, but I do think, if you look at what neuromodulation has accomplished over the last 10 years, brain-machine interfacing, restoration of function, in spinal cord injury, we got people walking. The science is impeccable. And so I like to say, because I am to the future of medicine is neuromodulation. It's not that.
Well, there you go.
That's a good place to end it.
Great. Well, Susan, thank you very much. Panelists, thank you very much. Lisa, thank you very much.